So in this video we're going to talk about adaptive radiation in polychaetes. Polychaetes are of course the largest group of animals in annelids. So let's see that. So let's start with H.F. Osborn coined the term adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation to refer to the differentiation of habitat in several directions from a primitive type. So, for example, if there is a what this means, if there is a ancestral population, a group of animals, they may separate or adapt in different directions for the need of food for different habitats. Right? For example, we have studied about Darwin's Darwin's finches, right? The finches birds he found on Galapagos Island. So, once upon a time, there may be just one ancestor population of finches, but as the time went by, some of them started eating only seeds. So their beak adapted like that, something like this, for seed eating. Some of them started eating cactus, right? Some of them started eating insects. So, according to that, their beaks and the living habitat, their body, everything slowly over millions of years they changed and adapted, and that is adaptive radiation, right? Differentiation of habitat, that is adaptive radiation, that is differentiation of habitat in several directions from a primitive type. Now, animals belonging to the same or closely related group adapt for different modes of life. They are said to show adaptive divergence or adaptive radiation, like we saw in Darwin's finches. They um, chose um, they chose for different modes of life. Some of them eat seeds, some of them insects, some of them cactus. So they have different modes of life and they show adaptive divergence. Now it is breaking up the parent stock into diverse lines which continue their own evolution. Lamarck called it embranchment and Darwin called it divergence. Let's go to the next slide. The two fundamental need that mainly drive adaptive radiation are need for food and for safety. Like we saw in Darwin's finches, why they separated in different type of beaks, why they adapted themselves in different types. That is because for food, some of them started eating seeds because there was not enough food for all of them. So some of them started eating seeds, some of them started eating insects, only insects, some of them starting something else. So according to that, for food save and security, they diverge in different directions. Now Polychaeta, the largest class of Annelida, shows greatest diversity in the phylum. Majority of polychaetes are marine and exhibit a variety of habit and habitats and hence show great adaptive diversity. Right? So general body form is extremely variable depending on whether form is sedentary, free living or pelagic. Sedentary is of course that they live in the bottom of the sea. Free living lives alone or not in colony, and pelagic is they live in the surface of the water. So they can be of many types. So polychaetes are usually divided into errantia and sedentaria. So errants are free swimming, includes crawling, actively burrowing and partially Tubisilis forms. While sedentarians are permanently burrowers or tube dwellers. As a sedentarian name tells us, they are sedentary. That is, they live in burrows, right? Burrows. So they live in the bottom of the sea and burrows. So sedentarians are permanent burrowers. They don't move really, they just burrow themselves in the sand at the bottom of the sea, or tube dwellers live in their own secreted tubes. Erantia, on the other hand, errants are free swimming and very active, includes crawling, actively burrowing and partially Tubisilis. So errants are active while the sedentarians are very sedentary and do not move at all. Now adaptive diversity in polychaetes may be discussed in dealing with the habitat and nutrition of feeding. Now diversity according to habitat, right? According to habitat, the first type is crawling polychaetes, those polychaetes that crawl. So these are of course marine free moving animals that crawl on the sea bottom, right? Head bears sense organs such as eyes, tentacles, antennas, cirri, and palps. Locomotory organ parapodia help in crawling and swimming. Parapodia are large, they bear setae which can be retracted and protruded but are crawling among rocks and stones. Sense organs and prostomium and peristomiums are well developed due to free swimming and crawling habitat. Body segments are generally similar. So let's see an example. So this is a nereis. As you can see, the example of a crawling polychete. So as you can see here, these are its parapodia that helps these structures that are moving. So these orange color structures, they're moving. So these are the parapodia, and they help in swimming, of course, or crawling. Locomotory organs these are, and also these are marine, free living. They move or crawl on sea bottom, and as you can see in this one's head, they have this prostomium. This is prostomium, the head, and this is the peristomium at which the antenna, cirri, etc. palps are all present, right? So this is the prostomium, and so this is nearest example of a crawling polychete. So this is the second one, that is the pelagic polychaetes. So they are also known as planktonic polychaetes because they live, as the pelagic says, at the surface of the water, right? So they live at the surface of the water, so known as planktonic polychaetes. Adapted to live in open sea in a semi-transparent appearance, so they live in the surface of the water on the open sea and are transparent or semi-transparent. Transparent. Why? Because they swim near sea surface where danger of predators and solar radiation is excessive, hence a semi-transparent imparts them invisibility and protection. So because they live in the surface of the water, there is high risk from the predator and also the excessive radiation, solar radiation from the sun. So they are semi-transparent or transparent, so the predator can't see them and the solar radiation couldn't affect them. So some have large eyes while other have none. Parapodia are small, they have small parapodia, and locomotion is by lateral undulation of the body. So lateral is something waves, in wavy structure they move, right? So they move by lateral undulation of the body. Cirri are generally longer and carry tango receptors. So so they have tango. This is cirri. They at the head they have many cirri, and all these cirri have tango receptors that help in locating food. Example is vanadis and tomoteris. So these are the tomoteris, as you can see. They use parapodia, paddle-like parapodia, by lateral undulation of the body. So we studied about the pelagic polychaete, the tomopteris. We saw that how it lives on the surface of the sea and how it is semi-transparent for invisibility and protection. The parapodia were small and moved by lateral undulation. So let's go to the next. The burrowing polychaetes. The burrowing polychaetes, right? So these are of course those polychaetes that burrow themselves, adapted for burrowing in sand. Body is elongated, prostomium is reduced or absent. Eyes, tentacles, and palps are also usually absent. Of course, if they burrow themselves in sand, if they're burrowed, they no longer need eyes, tentacles, or palps for their day-to-day use for sensory requirements, right? So these eyes, tentacles, and palps are absent. Parapodia is reduced. Of course, if they are burrowed all the time, they don't need parapodia for locomotion either, so they are reduced as they do not find of any use. Now move through the substratum by peristaltic contraction movement. So peristaltic contraction is by which we gulp down, right? We eat, so we gulp down, so that is peristaltic movement, like something like this in wavy structure of our esophagus size, that is peristaltic movement. So they move through the substratum like that, and circular muscles are well developed to assist in locomotion, right? Effective septation, coelomic fluid which has skeletal role in locomotion. So the coelomic fluid have the skeletal role in locomotion because they move by, of course, peristaltic contraction. For peristaltic contraction, like wave like contraction and relaxation, they need the coelomic fluid, right, that helps in it. And then there is setae. Setae help to anchor against the burrow wall. So the setae attach themselves to the burrowing wall in which they burrow themselves and spend most of their time inside the burrows and come out only to catch the prey. Example is Arnicola, Glycera, Amphitrite, and Terebella. You can see it here. This is Arnicola and this is burrowing itself into the ground. You can see Arnicola and it is burrowing itself into the ground. So you can see they have no parapodia on their body. You can see no parapodia on their body. This is another one. They have no parapodia on their body and they move by peristaltic movement and they're burrowing themselves into the sand. Eyes, tentacles are also absent on the head, right? So this is Arnicola. Now the fourth one, the Tubisilis. The Tubisilis polychetes, right? Those live in their own tubes. So these are tube dwelling polychetes. They live in the temporary or permanent self-secreted tubes. So they secrete their own tubes and then they live within it, right? So they could be temporary tubes or permanent self-secreted tubes, right? So these tubes act as protective covering. Of course, tubes live in tubes to protect themselves. The tubes of various species vary greatly in form and construction. Based on the form and construction, the Tubisilis burrows are of following types. Start with mucus-lined burrows. The mucus-lined burrows. Some errants making mucus-lined burrows in sand and mud. So these have well-developed prostomium and sense organs and parapodia. These worms are carnivorous and extend out from the tube opening to catch the prey. So what they do, the errants, the Unis or Perineris, what they do, they take sand and mud and they secrete a mucus that makes a tube-like structure with the sand and mud through the mucus, right? And they make a sticky kind of mucus and a tube is formed and they live within it, and they have well-developed prostomium, organs and parapodia, carnivorous, and from this tube they keep their heads out and catch prey and eat them. Example is Unis and Perineris. Now the second is shell and sand grain tubes. These kind of tubes are usually straight, built vertically in sand or mud. These tubes are composed of sand grains or shell pieces cemented together with mucus. Example is Pectinaria, Ovania, Diptopyras, Clymenella. The third is parchment tubes. These kind of tubes are membranous, usually U-shaped. Parchment tubes are U-shaped and membranous, thin, around 70 cm long and 2.5 cm in diameter. Often tubes may be covered by sand grains and shells. Example is Chaetopteris and Platineris. The fourth is the calcicerous tubes. calcareous tubes, right, of calcium. These tubes are made of calcium. Two large glands under the collar fold secrete calcium carbonate, which forms the tube. So in these worms, like Sabella, Serpula, they have, if this is their head, they have under the collar, they have two organs which secrete calcium. They have calcium, and so they make up a calcareous tube made up of calcium carbonate. And sometimes this tube may be covered by sand grains or shells. Let's go to the next slide. So after that, now diversity according to feeding habits of the organism. The first is raptorial feeders. What are raptorial feeders, also known as carnivorous feeders? Include moose crawling, burrowing in Tubisilis and all pelagic polychaetes. Feeds on small invertebrates including other polychaetes. Capture the food by means of irreversible pharynx or proboscis. Example is Nereis and Nephthys. After raptorial, that is detritus feeders, the sedentary polychaete species inhabiting the sea bottom rely on bacteria, diatoms, and other dead organic matter as food source. Detritus feeders may be of two types. Direct deposit feeders. These obtain food by directly swallowing sand and mud as they burrow through it. These organic matter contained in the sand and mud is digested while later is digested as castings. Direct deposit feeders include burrowing and tube-dwelling species, ophiolites and melanids. So detritus feeders are those feeders that live at the bottom of the sea, and they eat, from the sand and mud. They have to find their food, right? So there are two types. The direct deposit feeders, what they do, they swallow sand and mud, right? They swallow it all. And the organic matter is digested. The organic matter within the sand and mud is digested, while the sand and mud itself is digested as casting, is excreted out. Now let's go to the indirect deposit feeders. So in indirect deposit feeders, these animals lack proboscis, instead contain highly extensible ciliated groove tentacles secreting mucus. Small food particles moving down the groove by ciliary action accumulate at the base of the tentacles. These food particles reach the mouth by wiping the tentacles across the lips. These feeders not only feed on the bottom deposit but also use pulp to collect the suspended detritus. So what they do, they don't have a proboscis, instead they have ciliated groove tentacles. Ciliated groove tentacles secreting mucus. So this is their head. They have these tentacles, and these are lined by mucus. So when food particles come upon it, they settle on this, and so they move these tentacles across their lips. Food particles reach mouth by wiping the tentacles. They wipe the tentacles upon their mouth or upon their lips, right? So they wipe the tentacles which have the food across the lips. These feeders not only feed in bottom deposit but also use paws to collect the suspended detritus. Example is Cerebellum and Pectinaria. The third is filter feeders. Raptorial feeders, detritus feeders, now there is filter feeders. So sedentary and Tubisilis polychaetes are filter feeders. They do not have a proboscis, rather head is provided with long bipinnate filament called radiates with ciliated groove running along the oral surface. The radiates are used for food collection. So filter feeder have radiates which used in food collection, for food collection. We have several examples of this. The Chitopterus lives in U-shaped parchment tube, has a unique method of food selection. The notopodia of particular segment of body form fans. The beating of these fans produce water current which enters the tube from anterior end and flows out of the posterior end. The food particles in this water current are filtered out into the mucus bag formed by ciliated glandular epithelium. This mucus bag ends in a ciliated food cup where food is rolled up into a ball and passed forward to the mouth along the ciliary groove. So this is parchment tube, or also known as, can be found in coastal habitats, the Chitopterus. They're buried beneath the surface. They live in U-shaped tubes. These are the Chitopterus and are filter feeders. So the second is of course the Arnicola excavates L-shaped burrows. These have L-shaped burrows. It is periodically ingests sand with the help of its simple proboscis. Sand caves in and forms a funnel-shaped depression. The sand filters suspend food particles from the water percolating down the funnel. So they ingest sand. So what happens? Something like this, a funnel-shaped, after ingesting sand, something like this is formed, right? So with percolating water, food particles percolate into this their L-shaped burrows, and food comes into it, right? That is what happens in Arnicola. Now, commensal polychaetes. The commensal polychaetes, myzostoma is a commensal that lives in the tubes of other polychaetes or with sea cucumbers and sea stars. It is small body, is oval in shape and parapodia modified for clinging onto the host. Mouth has irreversible pharynx. After commensal, it is parasitic polychaetes. So, Histrodobella lives in ectoparasite in the gill chamber of crustaceans. Sucks is blood, right? Histrodobella is a parasitic polychaete in the gill chamber of crustacean and sucks blood. Ictotomus is an ectoparasite in the fins of marine eels. Its parapodia modified for clinging and mouth pods transform into piercing stylets for sucking blood. Now parchment has the Arnicola example. So here the sand is caving in and food particles percolate through it. Right? The column of sand containing organic detritus come to it and it eats that. So thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe.